Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you had a great weekend. Hope you had a relaxing weekend. Did you feel all the healing? It's a time of healing, everybody. Don't you feel the healing? So there is no President-elect Biden until December 14th, when the Electoral College within each state meets. So Trump has until December 14th to prove widespread fraud or enough voter errors in order to flip a couple states. And as we talked about, I think on Friday's show, I welcome all the evidence. And quickly, please. So December 14th is when the state electors meet in their state capitals, and then January 6th is when the House and the Senate meet and confirm it officially. I'm not going to be I'm not peddling any conspiracy theories today, but when you're collecting 150 million votes with an unprecedented amount of mail-in voting, and with Georgia now within 10,000 votes, there's 5 million votes in Georgia and 10,000 votes separate. There's going to be some problems, whether they're intentional or they're accidental. So I look forward to the process of sorting all that out. In the meantime, I want to give some perspective and then some peace here. I know you're disappointed. I was, certainly. But I'd rather be in the Republican position today than the Democrats. Let me say it again. I'd rather be in the Republican Party's position today than the Democrats. Of course, I want a red wave. I want the Republicans to control everything. And if you're a Democrat, you want the Democrats to control everything. So everyone's disappointed in that regard because none of those things are the case. But we got a split government right now, and I'd rather be the Republicans. Let me say this. I want to get to Abraham Lincoln in the next segment as well. I forgot to mention that. I want to talk about Abraham Lincoln. I got an amazing Lincoln story I want to share. But first, let's go over some of the major wins for the Republicans that have been overshadowed because of the presidential race. Now that the dust has settled here. Right now, at this moment, the Democrats have 48 senators. The Republicans have 48 senators. The Republicans are going to win Alaska, right? That just hasn't been counted yet because I guess you got to fly the votes in or whatever. And then the Republicans are going to win North Carolina. That's 50. So it comes down to the Georgia Senate races. So in Georgia, I don't know why they have this, but if a candidate does not get 50% of the vote in the general election, they have a runoff on January 5th, I think it is. So there's 2 Georgia races that are going to have a runoff on January 5th. So Georgia's going to be the absolute center of the political universe, and I feel so bad for everyone in Georgia because that is going to... It's not really going to decide who's going to control the Senate because I think I know the Republicans control the Senate right now when you add in North Carolina and Alaska. And then keep in mind, Joe Manchin is the senator in West Virginia who's a Democrat, but he votes with Trump 90% of the time, so he's not even really a Democrat. I am not worried about Georgia at all. Of course, we got to fight, we got to win, we got to do whatever it takes, but I am zero worried about Georgia, if for no other reason, the senators who are running in Georgia won by a lot. The Republicans won by a lot. They just didn't get over the 50% threshold. And then you throw in the Libertarian candidate who got like 3 or 4% of the vote. They're not going to go for Biden or for the Democratic candidates. So I'm zero worried about the Georgia Senate races. Got to fight, got to win, but not worried about that at all. Listen, it could go either way. I would imagine the rural areas of Georgia, which make up the entire state, are pretty ticked off that stupid Atlanta made them a blue state for the first time in who knows how long. Or maybe the Democrats in Atlanta are going to be fired up and keep the momentum going. I don't know. But either way, the Republicans are going to control the Senate. The congressional races, I don't have the numbers in front of me here because it's still changing a little bit, but I think there were 27 toss-up races and Republicans won 18 of them. And there's a few more that are up in the air now, but it looks like the Republicans are not going to have the majority, but maybe down by only 5 votes. So Democrats are going to have the most narrow congressional control maybe ever. like a 5-person majority. The conclusion of all this is there's no way Biden's going to get any legislation through ever. There's no Green New Deal passing through a Republican Senate, let alone a barely blue Congress. There's going to be enough Democrats in moderate centrist districts in red states that are not going to go along with AOC's dictates, right? There's no blue mandate. I don't think there's going to be any change in anything. I don't even think they're going to be able to repeal Trump's tax cuts. Certainly not court pack. Biden is so limited right now, which is great. And that leads us to the second noteworthy thing about the House. There's a civil war going on right now in the Democratic Party between the centrists and the progressives. AOC and her wing of the party, they're in super safe congressional seats. So they can just go as crazy as they want all the time. The centrists they lost a ton of races. They were supposed to, all the Democrats were supposed to win, blue wave, right? They were supposed to win 20 seats, gain 20 seats, and they lost 20 seats at the end of the day. So the centrists are super ticked off at the progressives. The progressives in the party have more voice, but they're gonna have way less power. And how is Pelosi and Joe Biden gonna manage that? It's a huge problem for them. And it's not an enviable situation, especially because the Republicans right now have never been more unified. Even if Trump's not at the top anymore, it's gonna be interesting who takes over as the face of the party. But that'll be fun to figure out because there's a lot of great options. There was some conference call that took place among Democrats. I forget what day it was. All the days are blurring together. But there was a Democratic centrist from Virginia who was on the call and said, we need to never use the word socialist or socialism again, like we're Democratic socialists. Should stop saying that. We lost good members because of that. And she said, if we're classifying Tuesday as a success, we will get blanking torn apart in 2022. Okay, so that's the centrist perspective. But then Rashida Tlaib chimed in. Rashida Tlaib, she's part of the squad. She chimed in, she threw the race card and said, to be real, it sounds like you're saying stop pushing for what black people want. No, it wasn't even black people. It was what black folks want. Do you remember we did a segment months ago about the word folks? F-O-L-K, F-O-L-X. F-O-L-X is how they spell it. That's the transgender. But folks is it's a very pro-transgender term, right? It's not guys or man or woman. It's just folks. We're all folks. So she said, to be real, it sounds like you're saying stop pushing for what black folks want. Man, the Democrats are in a bad place right now. They got like a race war going on within the Democratic Party. You say, if someone in the Democratic Party, a centrist, says, hey guys, let's stop using the word socialism, didn't play great for us down in Florida and other places, they say, whoa, why are you so racist? Third big thing, the control of the state legislatures. This is a huge deal. Guys, we got the map here. This is the states that have Republican control of the state legislatures. Now, the purple is split. So Alaska and Minnesota are split. Every other state has single party control, which isn't necessarily a great thing, which we'll get to in a second, but alas, that's the state, that's the deal. So the Democrats planned on flipping the state legislatures of Texas, North Carolina, Iowa, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Not only did they not do any of that, but the Republicans flipped New Hampshire. New Hampshire is now a red legislature. Blue New Hampshire. So Republicans now control 29 state legislatures. That's a huge deal, especially today. So 2020 is what they call a redistricting year. You may have heard that by now, or you're going to, certainly. It's a census year. Now, I think Harsanyi mentioned this. He said when the Democrats do it, it's redistricting. When the Republicans do it, it's gerrymandering, right? But every 10 years, the state legislatures draw the lines of the congressional districts. So the state legislators that are controlled by Republicans in those blue states, right, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, are going to draw the congressional boundaries to benefit Republicans. And that's a big deal, obviously. And then even on a local level, there's tons of stories like this that I don't even know all of them, but in deep, deep blue Rhode Island, the Democrat House Speaker, right, so the House Speaker was a Democrat, lost to a Republican. And in deep, deep blue Vermont, the Democrat House Speaker also lost to a Republican. What? We get so focused on the presidential race and on Trump, but the Democratic Party did not do good on Tuesday at all. On the ground, on local and state races, Republicans have way more influence and power, and hopefully are very emboldened moving forward. On a congressional level, no one has power. It's gridlock. That's good. We'll get to that in a second. And then in the White House, because of that, Biden can't do much. Obviously, there's going to be a ton of executive orders and things around the margins and everything. But Biden has no mandate. And then President Kamala, when she takes over, sometime between next week and next year, She's the least likable person ever. And she's going to have to run in 2024, probably, or even maybe the Democrats primary her. Right? They have a Democratic presidential primary against her if she's right. Like, that is not good for the Democrats in the near future here. And 4 years flies. So I think Republicans it's looking good for Republicans. Yes, there's reasons for discouragement, but there's also reason for great encouragement moving forward. So I think that's where we are right now. I just want to express this again. The gridlock that we're going to see in DC is good. It's good. It's the design. It's not a bug. It's the feature of the system. I want to play this video here of Antonin Scalia. So he was telling the story of how, well, first of all, he said when he'd go to law schools and he'd ask people if they've ever read the Federalist Papers. And he said a couple hands would go up. And he'd be like, and he'd say, no. How many of you haven't just read like 2 of them, but all the Federalist Papers? And he says maybe 5% of the law school students. And he said he was so discouraged by the fact that we're not teaching the future about generations about the Federalist Papers, which gets us into the hearts and minds of the men who wrote the Constitution. Anyway, he'd ask the law students, why is America a free country? And everyone would say it's because of the Bill of Rights. We're a free country in America because we have a Bill of Rights. And Scalia said, no, it's not the Bill of Rights that makes us a free country. Here's what he said.
But then I tell them, if you think that a Bill of Rights is what sets us apart, you're crazy. Every banana republic in the world has a Bill of Rights. Every president for life has a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights of the former evil empire, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was much better than ours. I mean it literally. It was much better. We guarantee freedom of speech and of the press. Big deal. They guaranteed freedom of the speech, of the press, of street demonstrations and protests, and anyone who is caught trying to suppress criticism of the government will be called to account. Whoa, that is wonderful stuff. Of course. Just words on paper. What our framers would have called a parchment guarantee. And the reason is that the real constitution of the Soviet Union, you think of the word constitution, it doesn't mean a bill, it means structure. Say a person has a sound constitution, has a sound structure. The real constitution of the Soviet Union, which is what our framers debated that whole summer in Philadelphia in 1787. They didn't talk about the Bill of Rights. That was an afterthought, wasn't it? That constitution of the Soviet Union did not prevent the centralization of power in one person or in one party. And when that happens, the game is over. The Bill of Rights is just what our framers would call a parchment guarantee.
So good. Very few countries have a bicameral legislature, a House and a Senate. Like the House of Lords in England, they don't have any power. France and Italy, they're an honorific Senate. The fact that in America, we have to get the same language passed between 2 different bodies is a huge deal. Very few countries have a separately elected president, right? So all across Europe, the legislature elects the prime minister. And if that doesn't go, if they don't go along, then they just fire the prime minister and they put a new prime minister in, right? There's no disagreement between the president and the legislature like we have here. Our founding fathers were brilliant, is the point. And they designed a system of gridlock. Gridlock is good. This is exactly how they set it up. Because our founders, their biggest concern was too much centralization of power. And that does not exist right now in DC. And that is a good thing. Gridlock is good. I hope that's encouraging. So it looks like we've avoided riots for now. Again, we'll see what the real election results are soon. But, and I did see a video of this massive group of people outside someone's house. I don't know anything about this video, but this huge group of people outside someone's house in the middle of the night, and the guy was screaming from his porch, look at my Biden sign. Don't be violent. Look at my Biden sign, right? And the crowd's screaming back at him. They're calling him a white supremacist. Oh, how dare you tell black people how to protest? You're an old white guy. You're a white supremacist. Crazy. So I would not fall for all the rhetoric of peace and healing just yet. So I don't think we're out of the woods with rioting. But no matter who wins the presidency in the end, we've had a country in lockdown for 8 months. And we've printed more money than ever, not even close. Gold is the hedge against inflation. If you think that the value of the dollar is going to go down over time, and don't quote me on this one, you call them up and they'll let you know, but it's something like the value of the dollar has gone down like 8% since March or something like that. I don't know anyone who doesn't think it's going to keep going down, but gold is your hedge against that, right? That's the number one reason for me why I bought gold and silver. Never has the government spent so much money and printed so much money ever, and no one really talks about it. Everyone's like, oh yeah, here's another $3 trillion bill, and we pat each other on the back because it was done bipartisan. What are you talking about? Our deficit is 3.1 trillion for this year. It's good for gold. So where do you get some? Where do you buy it? Patriot Gold Group. Give them a call. It takes a few minutes. That's it. A few minutes and gold's on your way. Couldn't be easier. It's safety, it's purchasing power, it's catastrophic insurance, it's something of value to pass down to your kids and grandkids. It's something to flip if you want in a few months, because I only see it going up. 1-800-798-4260. 1-800-798-4260. The people who pick up the phone are amazing. They're wonderful. They'll answer any of your questions. 1-800-798-4260 or patriotgoldgroup.com. Hey, Slater Crusaders, thanks for being here. We're going to talk about the president's legal avenues coming up here in just a little bit. But assuming Trump loses the election, and it depends how much hope you're leaving out there, which is totally fine. There's some hope I'm clinging to. But for this conversation, let's assume he loses the White House. So first of all, don't get too discouraged because of all the good things Republicans did on Tuesday, as we just talked about. Great victories that, again, I think Republicans are in a better position than the Democrats are, to be honest. But assuming Biden wins and Trump loses, that hurts. Like it stings. We lost. I wanted Trump to win. It's gonna hurt. Doesn't feel good. So I've been thinking a lot about how to work through that disappointment. A couple things. First, the segment we just did, right? Let's talk about the wins. That made me feel better. It's true. Second, be grateful for it, right? James 1, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters. Pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Consider trials a pure joy. Third thing, perspective. When I think of sadness and hurt and disappointment, I think of the life of Abraham Lincoln and how it made him who he was. 1860, it was the state Republican convention in Illinois, and Lincoln came to the stage, and the entire audience was freaking out, right? Like a Trump rally times 10, just bursting in approval. They shook the stage so much. They loved him so much, the awning of the stage collapsed. The newspaper the next morning said the roof was literally sheared off the building. They were so in love with him. And someone who was there who saw Lincoln said, I then thought him one of the worst plagued men I ever saw. What? He was at the height of his political career. All these people, adoring fans, cheering on. What do you mean the worst plagued men? At the end of the night, everyone left, and the lieutenant governor of Illinois saw Abraham Lincoln sitting alone at the end of the hall with his face in his hands. And he walked up to him, and Lincoln looked up and said, I'm not very well. One of his former law colleagues said, no element of Mr. Lincoln's character was so marked, obvious, and ingrained as his profound melancholy. That's what they call depression, basically. His law partner said his melancholy dripped from him as he walked. came across a book, or a book review of a book called Lincoln's Melancholy, How Depression Challenged a President and Fueled His Greatness. And the premise is that Lincoln's sadness equaled his greatness. Lincoln suffered more, he hurt more, he just struggled more. And that made him who he was. And think about his life. Lincoln's infant brother died when Lincoln was 3 years old. His brother Tommy died when he was just 3 days old. His mom died when he was 9. The last couple weeks of her life, she had convulsions. So it was like a violent death at the end of her life. His dad was a cold, even violent person. His first love died of typhoid when he was in his 20s. His wife was manic depressive, and 2 of his sons died when they were kids. Like, holy cow. Like, he said, I'm the loneliest man in all the world. He said, if there's a place worse than hell, I'm in it. I'm the most miserable man living. I must die or be better. He figured out how to be better. So what did he do? The author of this book says that the lesson of Lincoln's life is that a passion to secure justice can be a remedy for melancholy. A passion to secure justice can be a remedy for melancholy. And purpose. Person, a purpose, mission, a focus outside of yourself can cure melancholy. It's interesting, America is a very optimistic culture, right? So our culture is optimistic, so our politicians are very optimistic. But there's a very strong argument that creativity and especially wisdom can come out of the depths of despair, right? So we're supposed to be up here happy-go-lucky all the time. But if you live up here, you can miss out on a lot of life that can come from down here. And the question is, would Lincoln have been as amazing of a leader as he was without experiencing those depths within his life? So the Lincoln-Douglas debates, people think that was for president. He was running for the Illinois Senate, and he lost. Right. He lost the election. He lost the race for Senate. Oh, the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. He lost. But his response was, keeping in mind, obviously, all the things he's been through before. He said, the cause of civil liberty must not be surrendered at the end of 1 or even 100 defeats. You gonna give up? You gonna give up? Lincoln didn't. Must not be surrendered at the end of 1 or even 100 defeats. Later, during some of the worst days of the Civil War, Lincoln said, I expect to maintain this contest until I am successful or until I die. He did not let disappointment stop him. Ever. I'll end with this Lincoln story. It's one of my favorites. So imagine this. Lincoln's in his mid-30s, and he's doing this speaking tour with a couple other guys across Illinois, and he happened to cross paths with this singing group of women and a girl group, an 1840s girls group. And they spent 8 days together, the men and the girls. And the 8 days in this hotel together. And they would go to each other's things, right? Like the guys would go to their singing concerts and the girls would go to their political speeches. And they were together for 8 days in the hotel. And on the last night, they stayed up late down in the hotel lobby singing all night long. And at one point in the night, they were poking fun of Abe to get up and sing, and he was embarrassed. And he said, all right, listen, I'll tell you what. You girls have been so kind singing for us. I will repeat to you my favorite poem. So imagine this, right? Like 1840s, whatever like an 1840s hotel lobby would look like in Illinois, right? And you got these groups of people, and Abraham Lincoln steps up, the long, gangly, funny-looking Abe, and he leans up against a door, and he recites this poem from memory. I'll just give you the first 2 and the last 2. There's like 10 verses. He said, oh, why should the spirit of mortal be proud? Like a swift fleeting meteor, a fast flying cloud, a flash of the lightning, a break of the wave, he passeth from life to his rest in the grave, meaning life is short. The leaves of the oak and the willow shall fade, be scattered around and together be laid, and the young and the old, and the low and the high, shall molder to dust and together shall lie. It's very Hamlet-esque. Right? Hamlet talked about how the fat king and a skinny beggar, they both die and both become worm food in the end. And then the last two verses, yea, hope and despondency, pleasure and pain are mingled together in sunshine and rain. And the smile and the tear and the song and the dirge, it's like a funeral song, still follow each other like surge upon surge. 'Tis the wink of an eye, 'tis the draught of a breath, from the blossoms of health to the paleness of death, from the gilded saloon to the bier, like a coffin, to the bier and the shroud. Oh, why should the spirit of mortal be proud? Life is short, is what he's getting at. The lead singer of the group, she said she was so moved by it that everyone was crying. And she asked who wrote it, and Abe didn't know. We know now who wrote it, but he didn't know who wrote it. And he said, she said, can you please get me a copy? And the next morning she's down in the lobby eating breakfast, and he walks behind her, and she just sees this giant hand come in front of her and hand her this piece of paper with that poem. This perspective of life is short gave Lincoln peace. Not to live a life of apathy, because that's one approach to it. Like, oh, life is short, who cares? But life is short, let's wring every drop of meaning out of it that we can. And sometimes the depths of life, the difficulties of life, the hardest things of life, the biggest disappointments in life can cause one to see the rest of life in much brighter colors. True story. Mike Slater. Come back and we'll talk about any legal recourse the president has next. True story. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So what legal pathway, avenues does the president have moving forward here? Let's talk with Zach Smith. He's a legal fellow at the Meese Center, which is part of the Heritage Foundation. Zach, how are you, brother?
I'm doing okay. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, good to talk to you. So what can the president do? What's next?
Well, he's filed 4 or 5 lawsuits in 4 or 5 different states right now. He's lost some, he's won some. Unfortunately, he's facing a tough road ahead to overturn what looks like the outcome of the election through litigation right now. Probably his best path for getting reviewed by the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, is a case out of Pennsylvania right now that's challenging the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision to allow absentee ballots to be filed late after Election Day. And so that looks like the one that's most likely to make its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court right now.
Okay, so these are the mail-in ballots that could be arriving after Election Day and without even a postmark on them, which seems insane. So my understanding is that the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania did that unilaterally without the legislature, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, for whatever reason, said it's okay. Was there any legal recourse that gave the Secretary of State ability to do that in a time of pandemic or anything? Is there any legal loophole that the state can come back and say, no, we're allowed to do this in extreme circumstances?
Well, this is an issue we've been confronting in many different areas during the coronavirus pandemic. And I think it's worth emphasizing here, there is no pandemic exception to the Constitution. And in fact, that's when the Constitution is most important during times of crisis. And so if we go back and look at the Constitution says that it's state legislatures, not the Secretary of State, not the governor, not state courts, not federal courts, state legislatures that have the authority to set election rules and election procedures. And unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, that's not what happened.
So I'm with you. I wonder if there's any, like in 1926, the Pennsylvania legislature passed a law that said in times of crisis, the Secretary of State has the ability to make a decision, right? Or do you think there was any of that in there or no?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not an expert on Pennsylvania law by any means, But, we saw this same issue crop up in Texas. We've seen it crop up in places like Alabama, really across the country where governors, state election officials are taking it upon themselves to basically unilaterally rewrite election rules and rewrite them very close to the election. And so that's been a major issue during this cycle, and unfortunately is now causing a lot of problems.
Totally. Okay, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate, or trying to find the benefit of the doubt for Pennsylvania, because obviously I want the president to win that lawsuit. Now, the next question is, as Alito has said, let's put those ballots that have arrived after Pennsylvania aside. The question is, have those ballots been, like if I look at the Pennsylvania results right now, do they include those ballots? Meaning, if we don't count those, could the state flip, or does it not even matter, you think?
Well, it's unclear right now whether the state could flip or the outcome could be altered based on those ballots. But what Pennsylvania state courts have said, what Justice Alito said last week, makes a lot of common sense. Until we resolve the legal issues surrounding these ballots, keep them separate them out so that we can easily go back and undo the results, uncount these ballots if we need to. And so unfortunately, it wasn't clear that a lot of Pennsylvania election officials were doing that. But since Friday evening with Justice Alito's order, they have to do that.
Okay, geez, I wonder if that could actually turn any outcome in the end. Wow, okay. We got another couple minutes here. Give me another lawsuit you think that is noteworthy.
Sure. So I think the other very interesting lawsuit that highlights another important issue is the one out of Nevada. Basically, the allegation there, the Trump campaign is saying that potentially thousands of ineligible voters, in fact, voted in Nevada's election. And unfortunately, part of the reason for that is that Nevada's voter registration rolls are notoriously bad, notoriously out of date. And so the fact that Nevada moved to an almost all vote by mail system this past election really amplified a lot of those problems, it looks like.
So we have he would need to flip Pennsylvania, Arizona, or Nevada, and then maybe a recount in Georgia with some issues there,
Right.
perhaps, and then that would be it. That would be enough. Or even Arizona too, as those results are still being counted. Geez, that's amazing. Now, time is an issue here, right? As we talked about in a previous segment, December 13th is when the states all get together. The individual states go to their state capital and vote. So are we going to be able to get some outcomes on these lawsuits quickly?
Well, I'm certainly hopeful we can. States have until December 8th. There's a safe harbor provision in the Electoral College, the statute's enacting it, where if states can resolve any issues or disputed votes by December 8th, their votes will count. So I think everyone's certainly aware of that, and judges, the Supreme Court justices certainly are. And so I think there hopefully will be a real emphasis on getting this resolved by that December 8th safe harbor deadline.
Okay, let's do it. Let's hope. Zach Smith, legal fellow, Mies Center, Heritage Foundation. Zach, as we get more details of these cases, I'd love to have you back on and break them down for us.
Great. Thanks so much. I really appreciate that.
Appreciate it. Great job. All right, let's come back. We'll talk to Professor Vincent Racaniello about COVID and some great news about a new vaccine from Pfizer. They're now saying 90% success rate. So we'll get some details about that. Coming up next, True Story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So obviously, election heavy last week, but I still got a ton of stuff to talk about regarding COVID. So of course, we got to go to our professor. He's a professor of virology at Columbia University. Of course, you know that. And he's got his podcast, This Week in Virology. And Professor, I learned this week you have another podcast called This Week in, what was it? This Week in Parasitism. Oh, jeez. Professor, I got enough with the viruses. I can't be focused on parasites.
That's right. Just stay with the viruses. That's enough. No problem.
Let me pass this test, and then we'll come back to the parasites. When there's a global parasite pandemic, we'll have you back. Okay, so the wonderful news, I think, and I'm waiting to hold judgment until I talk to you, as I do with everything with COVID. It seems like Pfizer and BioNTech says their COVID vaccine is more than 90% effective. What do we know here?
All right. So as you know, this has been in people now for some time. They have a big trial, something like 30,000 people. And the goal is to see if vaccination with their vaccine will prevent COVID-19. And so they vaccinate a certain number of people, and then a certain number of other people get no vaccine. They get a placebo or a control. And then they let them go out in the world and they see how many people get COVID-19 in both groups. All right. And so right now they've gone through 94 cases. They have 94 cases of COVID-19 diagnosed in both groups. We don't know how it breaks down with both. But basically what they are saying is in the vaccinated group, they were 90% protected against disease compared with the placebo group. So of course, that's a good news, right? It's better than 10% or 20%. 90% is very good. The question just is, will that number stay high as we go further on? Because they're looking at many, many more people, of course, or will it drop? But I think it's great news at this point for sure.
Okay, what are the limits of our knowledge based off of that study?
All right, so we don't know anything. We have no data. We just have a press release from the company because the trial has not been cracked open yet. Remember, it's a double-blinded trial, which means that the people don't know what they got, and the people running the trial don't know who got what. And there's only one board, the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, that knows what's going on. And they look at the data. There are certain stopping points built into the trial. And the first one was 94 infections. And they looked and they told the company, okay, you're 90% effective. And so the company released that. Now, the only worry I have is that as we go on, it will drop. But I think starting at 90% is a great sign. The only worry, of course, is whether there'll be side effects. And, you know, if you listen to the last TWIV, we talked about heart problems caused by infection. And, you know, maybe that's one of the side effects that we're looking for. But this is an mRNA vaccine, right? Remember, this is an mRNA vaccine, and there's another company, Moderna, making a similar vaccine. So that's good because we'll have more doses, presumably.
Okay. I remember we talked last week or the other week, you mentioned that board, and you mentioned that once it reaches a certain effectiveness, it's unethical to continue. Do you think we've reached that level or no?
I think 94 is not enough patients. I think the next stopping point is, 120, 130. I don't remember the exact number. But if the number keeps up, then Pfizer could, the Data Safety and Monitoring Board actually will make a recommendation. They'll say, we think the trial should be stopped and everybody get this vaccine, or we think it should continue. But I think it's a bit early to stop and give it to everyone.
What's your prediction timeline? Like 2 months more?
The way cases are going now, right? They're over 100,000 a day in the U.S. alone. I think that we could see a break within a month, probably.
Okay.
And the next number reached. Yeah, this is really going fast.
Are they a part of Operation Warp Speed, or like how does that? Do you know the hierarchy of how that? Like, is everyone a part of Operation Warp Speed, or what does that even mean, really?
So Operation Warp Speed is a program to accelerate the licensing of vaccines, and Pfizer is not part of it. Actually, the spokesperson who made this announcement said we've never been part of Warp Speed, but there was a committee that selected certain companies to be part of that, and they would get funding to accelerate their vaccine development. And it's only, I think, 5 different companies that are part of that.
Do you think they would still be a part of the massive distribution that the federal government could provide, even though they're not a part of the initial Warp Speed process? I'm sure, right?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Sure.
So you mentioned a line earlier, and I heard this on your podcast. One of your guests mentioned the difference between preventing disease and preventing infection. Can you highlight that difference, and what would this vaccine potentially do?
All right. So what happens? You acquire SARS-CoV-2, you breathe it in, it starts to replicate in your respiratory tract. So now you're infected, right? And then at some point, 5 days after you get infected, you start to cough, you start to have fever, shortness of breath. That's disease. And all the vaccines are the endpoint that they're trying to prevent is disease, not infection. Preventing infection is very hard, but they want to prevent you from getting symptoms, okay? And so that's the difference. And so people may still be able to get infected even with these vaccines, but as long as they don't get sick, as long as they don't die, that's what we're trying to prevent here. And most vaccines prevent disease, not infection.
Yes. So that means you could still get it and then still presumably spread it. But if the vaccine's effective, then you'd spread it and it wouldn't really make a difference.
Yeah, as long as most people are vaccinated, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then 90%, even then you still have some people who still wouldn't, it would still be bad. Yeah. Okay, tell me about mink and how, was it Denmark is killing all these minks or something? What's going on here?
So as you know, mink are farmed to make mink coats, right? And the farms are huge. They have thousands and thousands of mink. They're all over. They're in Denmark, the Netherlands. Here in the U.S., we have mink farms. And a couple of months ago in the Netherlands and other farms in Europe, it was found that SARS-CoV-2 can infect minks from the humans who are taking care of the mink, right? So on these mink farms, you have to have people taking care of the animals. And so that's an issue because there's so many mink that the virus could go in them and then jump back out into people, all right? And what's happened now in Denmark, the virus going into mink, when a virus goes into a new host, right, it changes slightly. It always does. So going from humans to mink, it changes. So we're seeing these changes occurring in mink, and there's some concern. First of all, they seem to be jumping back into people in Denmark. There's some evidence for that. And I say some evidence because I haven't seen the paper describing the data yet. But the Danish Minister of Health said there's evidence that the virus is going from minks to people. And then last week, Denmark announced that these mink isolate viruses have changes that could make them not be protected from vaccination, right? And that's, of course, a big concern. But I don't have the data to really tell you whether that's a valid concern or not. And I don't want to just take their word for it. So that's really the concern, that a virus changes in mink and it goes back into people. And then if you're vaccinated, you're not going to be protected. I don't think.
Okay, so you mentioned before that viruses change a little bit as they're passed along, right? Because it's all randomness. So they change a little bit. Why would it change more in other animals as opposed to through other humans?
No, I don't think it changes more. It just changes differently, right? Because it's a different animal. It's a different environment for the virus, and therefore, all viruses change. And then when they're in a new host, the changes that arise are different from the changes that you would see in humans. So it's not more, it's just different changes. And just randomly, some of those may impact, human vaccination. And that's what may be going on here. So that's why Denmark is killing a lot of these mink to try and knock down this circulation.
What a dystopian worst case. And I'm not saying, of course, you're not saying this, I'm not even saying this, but just if I was a Michael Bay movie where we get the vaccine and everything's great, and then it goes through the stupid mink and comes back and does a sneak around on the vaccine, and we got to start all over.
That'd be terrible. I agree. Yeah.
Okay, but again, that's not what we're saying. We're just talking worst case scenario. I got a study here that says taking aspirin may lower risk of complication in certain patients. Have you heard anything about this?
Well, aspirin is an anticoagulant, right? And one of the problems with COVID-19 is that later in disease, when you're really sick, people form blood clots. And Daniel Griffin has told us this many times, blood clots all over the place. So they've been giving patients anticoagulants. And so aspirin, of course, has anticoagulant properties. Some people take a small aspirin a day, right, to prevent blood clots, which would give you a stroke. And so that's why it could be that aspirin is helping a bit with COVID-19.
On that, NPR wrote an article about how asking, is COVID-19 a disease of the blood vessels? What does that mean versus what maybe we think it's a disease of?
So right now, of course, the main disease is a lung disease, right? The virus goes down into the lung and causes serious problems. You can't breathe. It interferes with oxygen exchange. But I have heard a number of people say that what makes it a really unusual lung disease is that the virus is damaging the very small blood vessels in the lungs where, oxygen exchange occurs between the air and the blood. And so the virus may be damaging those. And of course, that makes it even worse. You can't take up oxygen. You can't get rid of carbon dioxide. So that is what they're saying basically. But it's not just the blood vessel disease. It's also a lung disease on top of it. It's just different.
Okay. Do you have any final thoughts, Professor? So first of all, 100% home run. I can't tell, Professor, if talking to you, if the analogy is like you're at batting practice and I'm just throwing fastballs and you just keep hitting home runs, or if you're like a ninja and I keep coming at you with some story and you're like bing, 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 block, you get every single one. And just for everyone's sake, we don't go over any of these stories. I just try to stump the professor every week. Any other final thoughts, Professor, that we need to know about?
All right, well, first of all, I'm not always right, but I think about this like all day for every day. So I can, when you ask me a question, I can tell you what I think. My last thought is, today a committee was announced to advise Biden going forward. And, I'm going to be critical of Biden as far as science goes. And this committee is okay. But if in the future you want to talk about it, there's some people on this committee that I don't think are going to contribute much. So, I think it's okay, but I would like to see a little more science on the committee, frankly.
Ooh, you got to give me one example. Give me what do you mean? Not who necessarily.
They have a surgeon, Atul Gawande, who maybe you know because he's written books and he's a nice writer and so forth. But I don't understand what he's doing on the committee. Why do we need a surgeon? I mean, this committee is all about policy and vaccine distribution and dealing with patients, and I think that's fine. But why he's there is not clear to me.
Anything else come to mind on there?
We have a couple of ex-FDA people, which is good. We have Michael Osterholm, who has been really good about the epidemiology of the disease. And I think he's going to be a good force on that. But I would have liked to see more virology, more epidemiology, because that's what we need.
I know a guy. If I ever get in touch with Joe Biden, I'll put in a good word for you, Professor. Would you want to be? would you want to be on that committee or a committee like that, or no?
I like to do this podcasting, and I would have to stop that, right? And I think I'm more effective as a podcaster than on a committee.
I think that's right. And everyone go watch that podcast. Just watch it yourself. It's free. This Week of Virology and microbe.tv is the website. Professor, always an honor. Pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful day. That's it. We'll do it tomorrow. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word.